Tonight's tale isn't about glorious victories or heroic conquests. No, this story cuts deeper. It's about facing the music, about divine retribution of the most creative kind. We're talking about punishments so ingeniously cruel, only the Olympian gods could have dreamed them up. You'll wander through ancient myths and half-whispered warnings, hearing cautionary tales about mortals and demigods who push their luck way too far. A liar here, a thief there, and always, somewhere in those storm clouds, a god watching with lightning in one hand and an unforgiving memory in the other. If these kinds of stories help you unwind, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if they genuinely bring you peace. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. There's something oddly comforting about knowing others are drifting off to these same haunting tales. So breathe deep. Let the world fade into silence as we follow the trail of divine punishment through myth, marble, and thunder. You're tucked in now. The room's quiet. For this little while, the world isn't demanding your attention. Now let's journey back, not just through time, but beyond it, into the realm of Greek mythology. This was a place where gods bickered like relatives at a messy family wedding, where mortals made spectacularly bad choices with alarming consistency, and where punishments were rarely proportional, merciful, or even logical, if we're being honest. Tonight's story begins not with the punishment itself, but with the divine mind behind it. Because to understand why the gods punished, we first need to understand who they were, and what made them so spectacularly moody. The Greek gods were a fascinating contradiction, equal parts brilliance and pettiness. Unlike the all-knowing, all-loving deities of later religions, the Olympians were, well, extremely human. They argued constantly. They cheated shamelessly. They got jealous, threw tantrums, and played favorites with mortal lives. One day they might bless you with beauty. The next they'd turn you into a lizard on a whim. Their sense of justice had less to do with morality and everything to do with their current mood. Take Zeus, for instance. The king of gods was famous for his thunderbolts and, let's say, an extremely active romantic life. He ruled Olympus with an iron fist and an ego to match. Woe betide any mortal or titan who dared outshine him, disobey him, or, most dangerously of all, make him look foolish. Then there's Hera, his long-suffering queen. As goddess of marriage, she spent most of her time dealing with her husband's endless affairs by taking out her fury on his mistresses and illegitimate children. Not exactly healthy coping mechanisms by modern standards, but she was nothing if not consistent. Athena, goddess of wisdom, could be brilliant and composed one moment, then turn a talented weaver into a spider the next just for daring to challenge her skills. The gods didn't punish based on fairness. They punished based on perceived slights. And the ultimate mortal sin wasn't always murder or treason. It was hubris. That dangerous act of overstepping your place, of getting too clever, too proud, too close to godhood itself. In Greek thinking, that was the ultimate mistake. Not evil, but arrogance. And the consequences? Eternal. The word hubris doesn't translate neatly into modern English, but think of it as arrogance mixed with impiety and a healthy dose of terrible judgment. In Greek tragedy, hubris is what doomed heroes. Not evil, but the failure to recognize their limits. Fly too close to the sun like Icarus? You'll fall. Think you're smarter than Zeus. Enjoy having your liver pecked out daily while chained to a mountain. Boast that your children outshine the gods. Prepare to watch them perish while grief turns you to stone. There were no gentle slaps on the wrist in these myths, only spectacular, often ironic punishments. This reflects how the ancient Greeks saw their world. Mortals weren't meant to rival the divine. Life was a delicate balancing act of knowing your place, honoring the gods, and surviving long enough to die with some dignity. The punishments in these myths weren't just entertaining stories. They were social instruction manuals. And if we're being slightly cynical, they were also great entertainment. After all, these tales weren't hidden away in books. They were performed at festivals, painted on pottery, and acted out in vast open-air theaters. The Greeks didn't just fear divine punishment. They admired the drama of it, the poetic justice. And sometimes, just sometimes, you got the sense the gods enjoyed doling it out a little too much. Consider the logistics. If you were an all-powerful deity wanting to make an unforgettable point, what would you do? Whisper a stern warning? Leave a strongly worded note? Hardly. You'd go for maximum theatrical impact. Turn a man into a stag and let his own hunting dogs tear him apart. Curse an entire family line for generations. Create a snake-haired monster whose gaze turns people to stone. Classic divine overreactions. The punishments always fit the crimes in the most dramatic, often eternal ways imaginable. A man cheats death? Condemn him to push a boulder uphill forever. A woman boasts about her weaving skills? Let her weave webs as a spider for eternity. A king refuses to worship Dionysus? Have his own mother tear him apart in a trance. In myth, punishment isn't about rehabilitation. The characters rarely get to learn from their mistakes because they're usually silenced permanently. But the audience learns. It's like divine billboard advertising. Don't do this. And by this, they usually meant don't anger the gods, don't step out of line, and perhaps most importantly, don't become interesting enough for the gods to notice you. Now you might be wondering, where's the actual justice in all this? Fair question. The ancient Greeks didn't view good and evil as linear concepts like we do. They believed in fate, Moira, and fate didn't care about fairness. You might be doomed from birth like Oedipus, destined to kill his father and marry his mother despite his best efforts to avoid it. Or like the House of Atreus, where everyone seemed cursed simply for being related to someone who once served his son as the main course at a dinner party. Long story, we'll get to it. Sometimes fate moved even above the gods themselves. Even mighty, bearded Zeus occasionally found himself at the mercy of fate's slow, inevitable wheel. But when the gods did punish, they often did so not because they had to, but because they could. And so a quiet truth emerges from these stories. In Greek myth, punishment is rarely about moral balance. It's about narrative weight, about reminding us how small we are and how easily we can become cautionary tales. Lest you think this is all just bedtime stories, consider how the ancient Greeks actually lived, building temples, composing hymns, and pouring ritual libations to keep the gods appeased. Not necessarily because they loved them, but because they feared their wrath. The gods were like temperamental landlords in the sky, and you definitely didn't want to be the tenant who made too much noise. And yet these same Greeks were philosophers, poets, and playwrights who questioned the gods through satire and tragedy. They used myth as both reverence and rebellion. Euripides filled his plays with divine cruelty not to worship it, but to highlight its absurdity. Punishment became a conversation about power, pride, and that fragile line between order and chaos. As we explore these myths together, Prometheus and Sisyphus, Niobe and Arachne, we begin to see how the Greeks used stories not for happy endings, but to stare into the uncomfortable truth of mortality, that we're small, temporary, and must tread carefully, especially when there's a goddess nearby holding a grudge. Oddly enough, all this talk of divine torment can feel comforting. Why? Because in Greek myth, every misstep has meaning. Every mistake gets noticed. Every slight, real or imagined, gets answered. In our chaotic world, there's something soothing about the idea that the universe cares enough to punish, that even unfair punishment is still part of a larger story. Of course, whether that punishment is eternal torment or an awkward transformation into shrubbery depends entirely on the gods' whims. And they do have a flair for the dramatic. So prepare to descend into myth's quieter shadows. Over the next chapters, we'll explore punishment's many forms, some brutal, some ironic, some unexpectedly beautiful. We'll meet a titan who gave us fire and lost his freedom, a clever king cursed with futility, a mother whose pride turned her to stone, and a hunter who made the fatal mistake of glancing at the wrong goddess at the wrong moment. All punished not for wickedness, but for daring to be a little too bold. So take a breath, let the world fade away, and remember, in Greek mythology, justice doesn't come softly, but sleep does, and that, at least, is something the gods can't take from you. Prometheus had a gift for seeing what others missed. A Titan by birth, yet far from the brutish monsters his kind were often portrayed as. He was clever, thoughtful, dangerous in the way that profound wisdom often is. And as it turned out, just irritating enough to provoke the king of gods himself. Now, Titans didn't have the best track record. Most were overthrown during the Titanomachy, the epic war between old gods and new Olympians. Many were banished to Tartarus, that lightless pit beneath the earth where the sun was just a rumor. But Prometheus? He chose differently. He sided with Zeus. A bold move, maybe even a shrewd one. Or perhaps he simply recognized that change was coming and decided to work with the future rather than against it. For a while, this alliance served him well. The Olympians triumphed, claimed the heavens, and began reshaping the world in their image. But once victory was secured, Prometheus found himself with little to do. Clever minds like his weren't made for sitting quietly on clouds. So he turned his attention to a peculiar species that had recently begun walking the earth. Mortals. Upright, soft-skinned, endlessly curious creatures who compared to gods were practically nothing. Barely more than animals with slightly better posture. But Prometheus saw something in them. A flicker. Not of fire. Not yet. But of potential. The gods weren't interested in these mortals. Zeus in particular regarded them as a failed experiment. He wanted them ignorant, dependent, obedient. In other words, boring. He even forbade them from having fire, that divine spark of knowledge, invention, independence. Prometheus, being Prometheus, ignored him. The theft happened in shadows and whispers. There are as many versions as there are stars in Olympus halls. Some say Prometheus scaled the divine mountain itself, hiding stolen flames within a hollow fennel stalk before slipping away unseen. Others claim he lit his torch from the fiery wheel of Helios' sun chariot as it raced across the dawn sky. The how hardly matters. Only the world-changing result remained. Fire came to mankind. We forget sometimes in our age of electric lights and glowing screens what a revolution this truly was. Fire meant survival, warmth against winter's teeth, protection from night's predators, cooked food that nourished stronger minds. It meant tools forged, villages guarded, stories shared around dancing flames long after sunset. Before fire, humans were prey. With fire, we became shapers of our world. Prometheus gave us that transformative gift, and for this, he would pay dearly. Zeus possessed many qualities: power, regality, occasional charm, but forgiveness wasn't among them. This wasn't mere theft to the king of gods. This was defiance that made him appear weak before lesser beings. And in the celestial hierarchy, that was the unpardonable sin. Yet Zeus didn't strike immediately. Oh no. Like a sculptor savoring his masterpiece's form, he took his time designing a punishment that would sting beyond mere death. First, he decided to wound humanity itself. If Prometheus loved mortals so dearly, what better way to hurt him than by cursing his precious creations? He summoned Hephaestus, the divine blacksmith, and commanded him to craft a woman, Pandora. Not just any woman, but one gifted by all Olympians. Beauty from Aphrodite, grace from the Graces, Hermes' silver tongue, Athena's needle skills, and above all, that dangerous spice, curiosity. They gave her a jar, mistranslated later as a box, containing every sorrow imaginable: disease, famine, despair, aging. Then sent her to Epimetheus, Prometheus' far less cautious brother. She opened it, of course. That was her nature, and from that vessel spilled humanity's eternal burdens. By the time she slammed the lid shut, only one thing remained inside: hope. Some call this mercy. Others suspect it's the cruelest joke of all. For what is hope but the capacity to keep suffering? With mankind now thoroughly cursed, Zeus turned to Prometheus. The Titan was seized by force and violence, literal divine enforcers, dragged to the bleak Caucasus Mountains, and chained to its highest crags with unbreakable adamantine bonds. The location was carefully chosen, not just remote, but indifferent. No shelter from howling winds, no witnesses to his torment, just endless rock and sky. Then came the daily ritual. Each morning Zeus' sacred eagle would descend to tear into Prometheus' side and feast upon his liver. Not symbolically, not temporarily, but again and again, every single dawn for eternity. At night, the organ regenerated, only to be devoured anew come daylight. The Greeks believed the liver was more than an organ. It housed emotions and vitality. To have it eternally consumed wasn't just physical agony, but spiritual obliteration, a living unraveling as regular as sunrise. And why an eagle? The symbolism writes itself. The king of skies, Zeus' own emblem, eternally feeding on rebellious defiance. Every feather a reminder. Challenge divine order, and consequences will roost upon you. Yet here's the astonishing truth. Prometheus never broke. No pleas, no recantations, just endurance. Some versions even have him mocking the eagle between screams, perhaps to retain sanity, perhaps to remind himself that even in agony, his mind remained unbroken. He became more than a victim. He became the ultimate symbol of resistance through suffering, the cost of giving others tools to rise. It's worth noting this punishment, though brutal, reflected historical tensions. The Greeks admired cleverness, but only within strict bounds. Tricksters were amusing until they threatened divine authority. Prometheus crossed that line spectacularly, suffering accordingly. Yet over centuries, culture reframed his torment. No longer mere folly, but noble rebellion. Aeschylus' tragedy, Prometheus Bound, portrays him as civilization's tragic champion, a lone voice of compassion against tyranny. Even in chains, he speaks of humanity's future with defiant hope. Centuries later, romantics adored him. Mary Shelley subtitled Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus. Byron and Goethe saw him as the archetypal rebel, artist, scientist, anyone daring to reach beyond tradition's grip. But myths must eventually move forward. Enter Heracles, mortal son of Zeus, ironically, who during his labors passed the Caucasus. Seeing the suffering titan, he shot the eagle with one perfect arrow, shattered the chains, and freed Prometheus. Normally, this would invite Zeus' fury, but either the king of gods had grown bored, or he saw strategic value in folding this act into Heracles' destiny. Some say Zeus had made peace. Others suspect he simply refused to reward disobedience with further attention. Kings and their pride, after all. Prometheus' freedom came with conditions. He had to wear a ring forged from his chains, embedded with a Caucasus rock fragment. A perpetual reminder that even liberation leaves scars. This also conveniently explained to Greeks why people wear rings. Mythology loves practical origins. Freed, Prometheus appears sporadically in later myths as prophet and advisor. He'd glimpsed fate's designs, knowing secrets even gods didn't. Like the prophecy that a son born to Thetis would surpass his father, which led Zeus to marry her off to a mortal, producing Achilles. But that's another tale. What endures is the legacy. Prometheus transcends character. He's the embodied idea that knowledge matters, that sacrifice can be noble, that sometimes doing right means suffering for it. In night's quietest hours, there's comfort in that image. One figure bound in bleeding resolve, holding fast for compassion's sake. The spark he gave was never truly taken back. As you drift towards sleep, imagine that glow, not in campfires or torches, but in the minds of dreamers across ages. The eagle's gone, the chains broken, the mountain asleep. And Prometheus? He's still thinking. Let that be enough tonight. Sisyphus was the kind of man who could talk his way out of a locked vault. And that, in the end, was precisely his undoing. Not a hero in the traditional sense. No divine parentage or dragon-slaying resume. This cunning king of Corinth ruled through silver-tongued diplomacy and, well, let's call it creative accounting. His city flourished as a trading hub between mountains and sea, its coffers filled through inventive taxation schemes and reinterpreted maritime laws. He taxed travelers, tricked guests, and generally behaved like the ancient equivalent of a mob boss with good PR. The gods, oh, they noticed. Zeus in particular found him insufferable. There was that time Sisyphus revealed one of Zeus's scandalous affairs, not out of moral outrage, mind you, but to curry favor with a river god. Then there were those unfortunate incidents where travelers accepted Corinthian hospitality only to mysteriously disappear, their belongings conveniently repurposed for the royal treasury. But none of this quite crossed the line into eternal damnation territory until Sisyphus got ambitious. He cheated death itself. Now, death, Thanatos, in Greek mythology isn't some hooded grim reaper. He's more like an extremely efficient civil servant. Silent, solemn, and all business. When Thanatos came to collect Sisyphus' soul, the king welcomed him with wine, pleasant conversation, and, oh, look at these fascinating shackles. Before death knew what was happening, Sisyphus had chained him with his own divine restraints. And so, for a time, no one could die. Soldiers survived mortal wounds. The elderly lingered in agony. Sacrificial animals stubbornly refused to expire on altars, awkward for priests everywhere. The natural order unraveled like a poorly woven shroud. Eventually Ares, god of war, and deeply inconvenienced by this lack of battlefield casualties, stormed Corinth, freed Thanatos, and restored the cosmic balance. Sisyphus was dragged kicking and scheming to the underworld. But if you think that was the end of Corinth's craftiest monarch, you haven't been paying attention. Before dying, Sisyphus gave his wife unusual funeral instructions. Don't bury me. No rites. Leave me unwashed, unmourned, and, this is crucial, without the customary coin under my tongue. In Greek belief, souls couldn't enter Hades without proper burial rites. That coin, ferryman Charon's fee. Without it, you'd wander the riverbank like a tourist without local currency. Sisyphus exploited this loophole brilliantly. Arriving in Hades as an improperly buried soul, he complained to Queen Persephone, "My wife dishonors me. Let me return just 3 days to correct this outrage. I swear I'll come back." The soft-hearted queen agreed. He returned, all right, not for 3 days, but indefinitely, resuming his throne, holding court, laughing over wine while winking at the sky. The god's patience finally snapped. Hermes, that swift-footed trickster god himself, was dispatched to retrieve Corinth's runaway soul. No more excuses. No more bargains. This time, the sentence was final. But eternal punishment for Sisyphus couldn't be ordinary torment. Zeus devised something cruelly elegant, a massive boulder atop a steep hill in Hades. Sisyphus's task? Push it uphill. Simple. No whips, no fire, just relentless effort. He'd strain for hours, muscles burning, nearing the summit, only for the boulder to slip at the last moment, thundering back down as he watched all progress evaporate. Then, here's the genius. He'd start again, and again, forever. The Greeks understood psychological torture. Other punishments had resolution. Prometheus was eventually freed. Tantalus's torment had moments when fruit almost reached his lips. But Sisyphus's curse was futility made tangible, effort without achievement, struggle without meaning. For a man whose life revolved around clever solutions, this was the ultimate cage. Centuries later, philosopher Albert Camus reimagined Sisyphus as the absurd hero, finding freedom in acknowledging the struggle itself as meaningful. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, he wrote, a radical notion that persistence without hope can still hold dignity. The ancient Greeks likely intended no such optimism. To them, Sisyphus was a cautionary tale. Pride defies divine law, mortality can't be cheated, and the price is endless frustration. Yet the myth's beauty lies in its adaptability. That boulder rolls through art and philosophy, sometimes as warning, sometimes a strangely comforting metaphor. We're all Sisyphus in small ways, rising daily to our tasks, watching some slip away, beginning again regardless. There's odd solace in that shared, stubborn human rhythm. So picture it now, dawn's first light brushing that hill in Hades. Gravel crunches underfoot. The boulder waits, not as enemy, but familiar companion. Sisyphus wipes his brow, sets calloused hands against stone, and pushes, not with rage or despair, just the quiet determination of one who knows the gods can only control so much. Beyond that, there's peace and persistence. Let your own burdens settle. Watch the hill fade. The boulder will keep, for now, rest. You're not trapped in the task, merely pausing from it. Sleep well. Tantalus was once the god's favorite mortal, not just tolerated, not grudgingly invited to Olympus like some misbehaving demigod cousin, but truly welcomed. A king of Lydia, possibly even the son of Zeus himself, depending on which poet you ask. He dined at their table, drank their nectar, and was entrusted with their secrets, however cautiously. And that, as you might expect, went terribly wrong. Because in Greek mythology, the surest way to ensure your downfall isn't to defy the gods, it's to get too close to them. To step into their world and forget, even for a moment, that you are not one of them. That you are flesh, and they are eternal. Tantalus forgot. Or perhaps he simply chose not to remember. His kingdom, Lydia, was wealthy, gold-rich, trade flourishing, the kind of place where excess was just another form of diplomacy. By all accounts, he had everything a man could want: power, divine favor, influence. And yet, because satisfaction is not a virtue in myth, it wasn't enough. Some say he began stealing ambrosia and nectar from Olympus, not because he needed it, but because he could. Divine sustenance, smuggled down to mortals like contraband dessert. Others claim he shared the gods' secrets, prophecies, gossip, the kind of celestial small talk that should have stayed on Mount Olympus. But the worst offense? The one that sealed his fate. He decided to test them. Tantalus invited the gods to a feast. And there, in an act so grotesque it strains belief, he served them a stew made from his own son, Pelops. Pause here. Even by Greek tragedy standards, this is excessive. Why? Was it arrogance? Insanity? A philosophical experiment gone horribly wrong? Perhaps Tantalus believed the gods wouldn't notice. Or maybe he wanted them to, hoping the horror would somehow affirm their divinity. Either way, he butchered his child, boiled the pieces, and placed the dish before them. The gods noticed, all except Demeter, still grieving her daughter Persephone's abduction, who absent-mindedly took a single bite, a shoulder, before the truth was revealed. The gods recoiled. Pelops was reassembled, resurrected, his missing shoulder replaced with ivory. He'd go on to have his own mythic saga, chariot races, curses, and children who made Greek drama look like a soap opera. But Tantalus? His punishment was coming, and not in the usual fashion. No thunderbolt, no Tartarus, no dramatic fall from Olympus. Zeus crafted something far more poetic. Tantalus was placed in the underworld's special torment section, a personalized hell. He stood in a shallow pool, clear water lapping at his knees. Above him, fruit-laden branches, figs, pomegranates, apples swayed within reach. The air was warm. The scene was abundance itself. And he was starving. Every time he bent to drink, the water drained away. Every time he reached for fruit, the branches lifted just beyond his grasp. An eternal cycle of almost. This wasn't just hunger. It was symbolism perfected. Tantalus, who once fed the gods something unspeakable, now surrounded by food he could never taste. The crime wasn't just murder. It was the violation of Xenia, the sacred guest-host bond Zeus himself protected. Tantalus had eaten at the gods' table, then served them horror in return. His punishment? Exile from all tables. Not just torment, but isolation in a world that offered everything but gave nothing. The Greeks knew the worst suffering isn't violence, it's meaninglessness. To want without fulfillment, to strive without achievement. That's the real torture. And for a man like Tantalus, who always found a way out, there would be none. Centuries later, poets and philosophers still return to his story. Painters depict him half-submerged, forever reaching. Writers invoke tantalizing as both verb and metaphor, the agony of the almost obtained. Plato saw in him the embodiment of insatiable desire. Nietzsche, the futility of mortal ambition. In some versions, he screams. In others, he grows silent. Perhaps, with time, he stops reaching. Perhaps he stands still, neck deep in memory, letting the water swirl around him like the past. Or perhaps, the cruelest possibility, he still believes, each time, that this time, the water won't recede. That this time, the fruit won't move. That hope, the same hope left in Pandora's jar, has found a new home in him. And that, too, is its own punishment. Imagine that orchard now. The light is soft. The pool is still. The trees hang heavy, their branches swaying in a breeze just strong enough to tease. And in the center stands a man, not raging, not weeping, just reaching. The fruit is always beyond his fingertips. The water is always below his lips. And time does not pass. Or if it does, he cannot tell. Sleep now. You are not in that orchard. Your hungers are real, but they end. Your thirst will be quenched. The fruit will not always sway away. But for tonight, let the image fade. And let the gods, petty, poetic, eternal, go on punishing those who reach too far. You need only close your eyes. The feast will still be there when you wake. Niobe was a queen, radiant, proud, and surrounded by children. So many children, in fact, that she sometimes lost count. Some say she had 6 sons and 6 daughters. Others claim 7 of each. A perfect symmetry, a full house, a mother's triumph. And Niobe? She was very proud of that. She ruled Thebes alongside her husband, Amphion, a king said to have built the city's walls with the music of his lyre. Together, they were golden, noble, talented, blessed. But it was Niobe who drew eyes. Not just for her beauty, but for her confidence, her certainty, her quiet conviction that she had earned her blessings. And that's where the trouble began. You see, pride in Greek myth is never just about being pleased with your accomplishments. It's about overstepping, forgetting your place. And Niobe? She began to forget she was mortal. One day, as Thebes prepared to honor Leto, the quiet, dignified goddess who bore Apollo and Artemis, Niobe looked around and asked a dangerous question. Why should the people worship Leto, who had only 2 children, when Niobe herself had many? It wasn't shouted. It wasn't carved into stone. It was, as these things often are, a moment of misplaced confidence. A queen surrounded by her brood, glancing at temple preparations, thinking, surely I am more deserving than she. There's a word for this, of course. Hubris, mortal arrogance. The crime of thinking yourself equal to a god, or worse, superior. And hubris never goes unanswered. Leto heard the insult, not directly, perhaps. Gods rarely eavesdrop in person, but words have a way of reaching Olympus. And though Leto was known for her grace, her response came through her children. She didn't send a plague. She didn't shake the earth. She simply sent Apollo and Artemis, divine twins, born of the mother Niobe had mocked. They descended like arrows. One by one, Niobe's children fell. Apollo took the sons, Artemis, the daughters. Some versions say Artemis spared 1 daughter or 2, depending on the telling, while Apollo left 1 son alive to carry the memory. The stories shift, as myths do, but the essence remains. Niobe, the mother of many, became the mother of none. There was no battle, no defense. The children died in fields, in palaces, by altars, not because they had sinned, but because they had been born to a mother who spoke too freely. Niobe fled. She ran to Mount Sipylus, her childhood home, weeping and hollow. There, she begged the gods, not for vengeance, not for mercy, but for release. And the gods answered. They turned her to stone. She became part of the mountain, her form frozen in rock, her face tilted downward. Her eyes, they say, continued to weep, a slow, eternal spring trickling from the cliffs like tears time could not dry. Even in silence, Niobe mourned. There are many kinds of punishment in myth. Some are loud, fire, chains, screaming. Others, like Niobe's, are quiet, still, eternal. She wasn't torn apart or cast into Tartarus. She wasn't made to suffer grotesque physical torment. She was simply left with memory, frozen, alone, weeping. And this, in many ways, is the most intimate torment of all. One that doesn't rely on monsters or chains, but on grief. A mother who once counted her children as trophies now counts only their absence. The myth serves, Of course, as a warning. Don't boast. Don't compare. Don't place yourself above the gods, especially in matters as sacred as motherhood. Leto had only 2 children, but those 2 were divine. Niobe had many, but they were mortal. In the cosmic scales of Olympus, quality outweighs quantity. Or so the gods would have us believe. But there's something deeper here. Niobe's story isn't just about punishment. It's about the fragility of joy, the speed with which life can turn from fullness to emptiness, the way pride and love tangle together until they're indistinguishable, until it's too late. She loved her children. That's rarely questioned. Her crime wasn't neglect or cruelty. It was pride. She loved them too much. Or, more precisely, she loved what they said about her. And who among us hasn't done the same? Measured our worth by our family, our achievements, our reflection in others' eyes. Niobe is tragic not because she was monstrous, but because she was recognizably human. Her transformation into stone also reflects an ancient idea that overwhelming grief turns people into something less alive. That mourning, carried too long, hardens, becomes landscape. The Greeks understood this. They saw a rocky cliff that resembled a weeping woman's face and thought, that is Niobe. Sorrow made permanent. Even today, on Mount Sipylus in Turkey, there's a rock formation locals call the Weeping Rock. Water seeps through limestone, dripping slow and steady. Geologists will tell you it's groundwater. But the myth remains. Niobe appears in later literature, too, a symbol of maternal grief, of arrogance punished, but also of sorrow remembered. Dante places her among the weeping souls in his Inferno. Shakespeare's Hamlet compares his mother's hasty remarriage to Niobe's tears, suggesting, perhaps unfairly, that her mourning was performative. But Niobe herself never speaks again. That is part of her punishment, and perhaps her absolution. She, who once spoke too boldly, now says nothing. Only the water speaks for her. There is power in that silence. A reminder that some wounds never find words. And perhaps, just perhaps, the gods showed her mercy. She wasn't erased. She was given a form that could endure. She was allowed to mourn. Pride turned to stone. Love turned to legend. Let your thoughts drift now to that mountainside. The wind is soft. The rock is warm beneath the sun. And from a crevice, water trickles, not loudly, but steadily. The tears of a mother who once had everything, and now has only this. Actaeon was a hunter, not a king, not a demigod, just a man who preferred the company of trees to taverns, hounds to heroes. He knew the forests of Boeotia like the lines of his own palms, the hidden springs where deer drank at dusk, the pine needle paths that whispered underfoot. His dogs, 50 in some tellings, more in others, moved with him as if part of his own body. Theirs was a quiet, sacred bond. But even in the deepest woods, a man is never truly alone. And for Actaeon, divinity was closer than he knew. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered golden through the trees, Actaeon wandered from his companions. Perhaps he followed a stag's trail. Perhaps he was thirsty. Perhaps, as some versions suggest, fate itself led him. What he found in that hidden glade was a pool, not some muddy watering hole, but a sacred spring, the kind that hums as it spills over rocks, its surface smooth as polished silver. And there, in that secluded water, bathed Artemis, goddess of the hunt, of wild things, of the untamed moon. The scene freezes here in myth's collective memory, the startled goddess, her arm half raised, the young hunter rooted in place, not with lust but with pure, paralyzing awe. Not desire, shock. A moment neither chose. But the gods don't deal in nuance. Artemis reacted in a heartbeat. She reached for the nearest weapon, water itself, and flung it at him with a word, or perhaps without one. Where the droplet struck, Actaeon's body began to change. His limbs bent unnaturally, his hands thickened into hooves, his face elongated, tongue swelling until speech was impossible. His eyes widened, not human now, but a stag's. Mind still his own, body ruled by instinct and terror. And somewhere in the distance, his dogs caught his new scent. What happened next is difficult to linger on, but we must. His own hounds, the pack he'd raised from pups, trained to track, to kill, to obey, now saw only prey. They gave chase. Actaeon ran. The forest he knew so well became a blur of panic, branches whipping his flanks, his own breath ragged with fear. He reached a clearing, stumbled, and they tore him apart. The hunter, undone by his own hounds. There are no songs about Actaeon's bravery, no temples built in his name. He's remembered, if at all, as a warning. Do not look upon what is forbidden. But what exactly was his crime? Some versions claim it was purely accidental, wrong place, wrong time. Others darken the tale. Actaeon boasted he was a better hunter than Artemis, or worse, sought her deliberately. The myth bends to fit the teller's purpose. But the punishment remains constant, because Artemis, for all her grace, is not merciful. She is fierce. She protects her boundaries. When her privacy is violated, whether by malice or mishap, she does not forgive. The stag transformation is no accident. Artemis is the goddess of the wild. To turn a man into prey isn't just revenge, it's symbolism. The hunter becomes the hunted. The master becomes the beast. His loyal hounds, once his pride, become the teeth of divine justice. There's something terrifying in that symmetry, but there's also something deeply human in Actaeon's fate. How often do we see something we weren't meant to? Learn a truth too soon? Witness a private pain and suffer for knowing? Actaeon's sin was visibility, and his punishment was erasure. Silenced, removed. Not a hero, but a whisper in the trees. Don't wander too far. Don't look too long. Yet we still do. Humans always have. We're drawn to mystery, to beauty's edges. That's the tragedy of Actaeon. He did what any curious soul might. Walked a little farther, looked a little longer, asked a silent question with his eyes, and found no answer, only punishment. Artemis slips back into the glade. The water stills. The leaves hush. The myth rolls on. Some say the gods took pity afterward, that Actaeon's soul was welcomed gently into the afterlife. Others say nothing. Just a story. Just a name. Just a man who became a stag, then a memory. Let your thoughts settle now in that forest. The air is cool. Sunlight filters through the trees. A stream murmurs nearby. You walk carefully. The dogs are gone. The hunt is over. There is only peace here now. And if you look, not too closely, you might see the shadow of antlers in the underbrush. A flicker of what was once human. A whisper of a man who saw, and ran, and fell. The gods aren't watching tonight, but the woods are. Let them keep you safe. Arachne wasn't born with a drop of divine blood. No noble lineage, no famous father, no prophecy singing her name. She was just a girl from Lydia, a region known more for its wool than its wonders. Her parents were humble folk, a mother who spun cloth for market stalls, a father who dyed thread purple using rare sea snails. Their home was quiet, industrious, content. And into that ordinary life, Arachne brought something extraordinary. From childhood, her hands danced at the loom. Where others saw tangled threads, she saw stories waiting to unfold. Her tapestries shimmered like living things, birds that seemed ready to take flight, horses whose flanks trembled as if breathing, leaves that rustled without wind. People whispered that she must have been taught by Athena herself, goddess of crafts and wisdom. Arachne said no. She had learned from no one. Her skill was hers alone, hard-won, practiced, perfected. Then she said something dangerous. I'm better than Athena. Not gifted, not equal, better. In Greek mythology, this is where the quiet part of the story ends. Because no matter how skilled the mortal, comparing yourself to a god, let alone claiming superiority, is the spark that lights the fuse. The word for this, again, is hubris. Not wickedness, but the act of forgetting you are small. Athena heard. Of course she did. The goddess descended to earth disguised as an old woman, wrinkled, bent, eyes sharp as needle points. She visited Arachne's workshop and offered a warning disguised as advice. Be humble. Thank the gods for your gift. Arachne, young and flushed with pride, refused. If Athena thinks herself so superior, let her prove it. The disguise fell away. There stood Athena in her divine glory, gray eyes blazing not with rage, but something colder, resolve. The contest began. 2 looms, 2 sets of threads, one mortal, one goddess, weaving side by side in silence. Athena wove first. Her tapestry gleamed with order and glory, scenes of Olympus triumphant, mortals kneeling in reverence, divine justice reigning supreme. In each corner, she wove warnings, mortals punished for pride, for disrespect, for daring to challenge the gods. It was, essentially, a threat stitched in gold thread. Then Arachne wove, and hers was flawless. She chose a different story, not the gods' greatness, but their flaws. Zeus seducing women as a swan, a bull, a shower of gold. Poseidon drowning whole cities in his temper. Apollo abandoning lovers. She didn't lie. These were tales whispered in every marketplace. But she told them with such precision, such beauty, that the cloth seemed to breathe scandal. Even Athena couldn't fault the craftsmanship. But the message was clear. Arachne had done more than compete. She had accused. The room went silent. The goddess stood. The mortal girl held her breath. Then Athena tore the tapestry to shreds. Not with a weapon, not with magic, just her fingers, ripping through the fabric like wind through spider silk. The threads unraveled. The scenes dissolved. And Arachne, humiliated, cornered, did what mortals often do when the gods destroy what they love most. She ran. She wept. And then, in some versions, she hanged herself. The myth doesn't pause to consider how young she was, how cruel it is to give someone talent and then punish them for using it too well. But Athena, perhaps feeling the weight of her own fury, chose not to let Arachne die. She touched the girl's body and changed it. Limbs shrank, skin darkened, fingers multiplied, thinning into delicate strands. Her body rounded, her eyes grew. Arachne became the first spider, and she would weave forever, no longer on a loom, but in corners, in rafters, in shadows. Her tapestries, now made of silk, no longer told stories mortals could read, but they glistened with morning dew, shimmered in moonlight. They caught not fame, but flies. Her punishment wasn't pain. It was reduction. Athena didn't kill her. She gave her eternity, but not as a girl, not as a rival. As something beneath notice, spinning quietly where few would look. And there she remains. It's easy to miss the cruelty in this myth. Arachne isn't burned or banished. She's made small. A girl once praised across cities is now something you brush away without thought. Yet she spins on. Despite everything, the spider still weaves. The myth raises questions that never quite settle. Was she wrong to boast? Was she foolish to speak truth through her craft? Should she have lied? Would that have saved her? Or was this always her fate? To create something perfect and be punished not for the work, but for who she was? In Greek mythology, talent is often a double-edged gift. Mortals are praised for their gifts, then punished for enjoying them too much. Daedalus built wings and lost his son. Orpheus sang too beautifully and turned at the wrong moment. Arachne wove too well and told the wrong stories. Perhaps the real crime wasn't challenging the gods, but revealing them. Athena is often called wise, but wisdom, when wounded, can be sharp. She didn't just win the contest. She ensured Arachne would never create as a human again, only as a whisper, a thread. And yet, spiders endure. Patient, silent, relentless. They spin in barns and caves and window corners. Their silk stronger than steel when woven strand by strand. They are not celebrated, but they persist. In that quiet perseverance, perhaps Arachne found a kind of peace. Let your mind drift now to a cobweb in a quiet house. Delicate, intricate, unnoticed by most. At its center, a small creature waits. Not in anger, not in fear, just stillness. She no longer boasts. She no longer weeps. She simply spins. And in the hush of night, when the gods have turned their eyes elsewhere, the spider remembers who she was, not with regret, but with the calm of someone who told the truth once and never had to speak again. Let that silence hold you now. The loom is gone, but the thread continues. Pentheus was a rational man, a king, young and sharp-minded, perhaps too confident for his own good. He ruled Thebes, inheriting the throne from his grandfather Cadmus, But unlike the old king who respected omens and mysteries, Pentheus had no patience for gods or their so-called miracles. Where others saw divine signs, he saw disorder. Where priests whispered of Dionysus' power, he spoke of discipline. And of all the Olympians, there was one he found particularly distasteful: Dionysus himself, god of wine, madness, and the unraveling of sensible minds. To Pentheus, Dionysus represented everything a kingdom should fear: wildness, emotion, chaos, the unchecked loosening of human restraint. He did not fear this god. He despised him. So when word reached Thebes that Dionysus had returned, spreading his cult across the countryside, Pentheus was not impressed. The stories troubled him: women abandoning their looms and children, running barefoot into the mountains, dancing in frenzied trances, tearing animals apart with their bare hands. These followers, the Bacchae, were caught in holy madness. To Pentheus, it sounded like hysteria, disorder dressed up as religion. He cracked down. Vineyards were uprooted, drums silenced. Soldiers marched into the hills to arrest the Bacchae and drag them back in chains. Order would be restored. Reason would reign. Then a stranger arrived. Handsome, calm, with eyes dark as aged wine. He wore no armor, carried no weapons. Yet when he spoke, people listened. He claimed to be a priest of Dionysus, a living testament to the god's power. He did not shout or threaten. He simply said, "Dionysus has returned. Those who reject him will suffer." Pentheus, of course, had him arrested. The stranger went peacefully. The guards threw him into the palace dungeon, and Pentheus came to interrogate him, to mock this so-called holy man. "You're weak," Pentheus sneered in the cell's darkness, deluded. "Your god is nonsense." He threatened torture, promised to cut off the stranger's long hair, to show him what real power looked like. The stranger only smiled. Then the chains fell. The torches blew out. The cell doors swung open untouched, and the stranger vanished. Not with a bang, a sigh. Suddenly, Pentheus found himself curious. He called his advisors. What do these Bacchae truly do in the woods? What rituals? What do they wear? He wanted to see for himself, but how? A king would never be allowed near their rites. The stranger reappeared. "Let me take you," he offered, disguised as one of them. "A dress, a wig, a veil. You'll witness everything." And Pentheus, logical, practical, proud Pentheus, agreed. Why? Perhaps it was madness, vanity, or perhaps the first sip of Dionysus' influence, not in wine, but in creeping curiosity. They climbed the mountain as the trees grew darker. The wind carried drums and distant shrieks. The scent of earth and fermented grapes thickened. Then, the clearing. The Bacchae danced, wild and radiant, moving like creatures untouched by gravity. Their eyes glowed with something not entirely human. Pentheus hid behind a tree, peering through leaves. He didn't understand what he saw. This wasn't debauchery. It was surrender. These women weren't out of control. They were free. The stranger whispered one last word in his ear, "Now you see," and left. The Bacchae turned. They saw the intruder. This false woman spying from the branches, and madness took them. This was Dionysus' true power, not destruction, but dissolution. He doesn't burn you. He unravels you. They surged forward. Pentheus ran, but roots caught his feet. The Bacchae seized him, and among them was Agave, his own mother, deep in the god's trance. She saw not her son, but a lion, a beast to be destroyed. She struck first. When the frenzy passed, Agave carried her son's head down the mountain in triumph, only to realize, too late, what she held. The stranger revealed himself at last. Dionysus, god of transformation, of blurred lines, of the moment when control becomes chaos. He had warned them. Now he was done. What do we make of this? Pentheus wasn't evil, just rigid, afraid of what he couldn't command. Dionysus punishes resistance. In Greek thought, he represents what we lock away, the cry we silence, the truth we avoid. And when ignored too long, it finds us. Euripides' tragedy The Bacchae leaves no easy answers. The god is both gentle and terrifying. The chorus sings of freedom while the stage runs red. You cannot suppress the soul forever, and if you try, it will rise. Let your thoughts settle on that mountain. The drums have faded. The women sleep. The wind moves through the trees. And somewhere in the deeper dark, the god smiles. Not in vengeance, in understanding. Tiresias wasn't born under a prophecy. His name carried no weight in his youth. Just another child in the city of Thebes, a place that seemed to attract more than its share of destinies and disasters. Thebes was never quiet, but Tiresias was. A watcher, not a dreamer exactly, but someone who saw more than he spoke. He noticed patterns in bird flights, shifts in wind before storms, the way a person's eyes lingered too long on silence. It's tempting to call him wise even as a boy, but that's not quite right. He was aware, alert to the world's hidden rhythms, and that awareness eventually led him into the woods and into myth. The moment that changed him forever didn't come with thunder or fanfare. It happened in the hush of a forest clearing, sunlight dappling through high branches. Tiresias was walking alone. No company, no grand quest, just a mind tuned to nature's whispers. Then he saw them, two snakes, coiled together in the grass. Some say they were mating, others fighting. Mythology rarely distinguishes between violence and intimacy, especially concerning snakes. Perhaps Tiresias saw something unsettling in their dance. Or perhaps he simply thought he was breaking up a quarrel. Whatever the reason, he raised his staff and struck, and the world shifted. In a breath, his body changed. His balance altered. His strength moved inward. He looked down and realized he no longer recognized himself. He had been turned into a woman, not merely disguised, but wholly, completely transformed. No explanation, no divine voice, just a new reality. For 7 years, he lived as her. He, now she, worked, moved through markets, gathered water, wove cloth. Some say she married. Some say she bore a child. Others claim she remained alone, but curious, always watching. What's certain is this: she remembered what it meant to be seen as a woman. The unspoken expectations, the way authority changed based on voice or stance, how touch carried different meanings when given versus taken. She noticed softness where there had been hardness, and hardness where she'd expected none. 7 years passed. Then, as if pulled by an invisible thread, Tiresias returned to that same clearing. The snakes were there again, or perhaps their descendants. It hardly matters in myth. This time, she didn't strike. She let them be, or in some versions, gently separated them. And once more, transformation. Tiresias became a man again, but not the same man. He carried something rare, the lived experience of both sexes. Not imagined, not pretended, but embodied. He knew not just how it felt to be a woman, but how the world treated her. The difference between being listened to and being heard, between commanding attention and being objectified. That knowledge settled in him like a stone in his pocket, not heavy, but always present. It might have remained private, a mystery known only to him. But this is Greek myth. The gods don't leave mysteries alone. Zeus and Hera were arguing, as they often did. This time, the subject was pleasure, specifically, who experienced more of it in love. Zeus claimed women did, 10 times more. Hera insisted men did. They bickered. They raged. Then someone remembered. Tiresias had been both. He would know. Summoned to Olympus, not asked. Gods never ask. Tiresias faced the question with no context. Who enjoys love more, man or woman? He didn't hesitate. Of 10 parts, woman enjoys 9. Zeus grinned. Hera seethed. And in a flash of divine pettiness, she struck Tiresias blind. No trial, no warning, just darkness. But Zeus, having gotten his answer, offered a consolation, prophecy. He opened Tiresias' inner sight. From that day forward, the blind man saw what others couldn't. The future, fate's threads, the truths people fled from. Thus Tiresias became the most famous seer of Greek myth, appearing in story after story, saying what no one wanted to hear. He told Oedipus the terrible truth of his birth. He warned Creon to spare Antigone. Again and again, he spoke clearly and was ignored. That was his true punishment, to always know, and to watch the world choose disaster anyway. Prophecy in Greek myth isn't power, it's sorrow. And yet, there's wisdom in blindness. Not the romanticized kind, but the real, gritty clarity that comes when your eyes no longer distract you from seeing. The Greeks didn't pity Tiresias. They respected him. Even Odysseus, that most cunning hero, had to descend into Hades just to hear his counsel. Let your thoughts settle now on his path. Thebes far behind, the future still unwritten ahead. He taps the earth with his staff, knowing where the cracks are. He doesn't rush. The world moves around him, and he walks through it like a half-remembered song. Greek mythology doesn't deal in saints, only survivors, cautionary tales, and mortals locked in an endless dance with divine whims. It also deals in punishments. So many punishments, not always proportional to the crime, but always memorable in their creativity. The stories we've explored, Prometheus, Sisyphus, Tantalus, Pentheus, Tiresias, aren't just fables. They're windows into how the Greeks understood their world. Their gods weren't just. They were reflective. Divine punishment wasn't about evil, it was about overreach. Hubris, stepping beyond your station. Let's walk through the lessons. Start with Prometheus, the clever titan who gave humanity fire, knowledge, civilization, the divine spark. For this, he was chained to a rock and eternally devoured by an eagle. Why? Because he acted without permission. Because he defied Zeus. Because he helped mortals not through force, but wit. To the Greeks, Prometheus wasn't wrong, just bold. And boldness to the gods smelled like rebellion. His punishment became a reminder. Every leap forward has a price. Then there's Sisyphus, the trickster who cheated death twice. His punishment? Rolling a boulder uphill forever, only to watch it roll back down. His sin wasn't murder or betrayal, it was defiance. He refused to die when it was his time, laughed in Hades' face, delayed his own funeral. The gods didn't kill him. They condemned him to futility. For a man whose life revolved around clever solutions, endless meaningless labor was the perfect cage. Tantalus, who served his own son to the gods as a test of their omniscience, got his own culinary hell, food and water forever just out of reach. To tempt the divine was to be tempted eternally. His punishment wasn't violent, it was poetic. Niobe, who bragged about her many children, watched them slaughtered before being turned to stone, still weeping. Actaeon, who accidentally saw Artemis bathing, became the hunted instead of the hunter. Arachne, who wove better than Athena, became a spider, still weaving, but never as a woman again. Notice the theme? The punishments mirror the crimes with cruel elegance. But not all were about pain. Some were transformations, like Tiresias, blinded but given prophecy. Or Pentheus, whose rigid denial of Dionysus led him to be torn apart by his own mother in a divine frenzy. These weren't just torments, they were revelations. The Greeks didn't believe in fairness. They believed in Moira, fate's unbreakable thread. Even Zeus bowed to it sometimes. Punishment wasn't about morality. It was about narrative weight, about reminding mortals how small they were. And yet, there's comfort in that. In a chaotic world, the idea that every misstep is noticed suits. That even unfair punishment is part of a story bigger than you. Of course, whether that punishment is eternal torment or an awkward shrubbery transformation depends entirely on divine whims. And those whims, they have a flair for the dramatic. The house of Atreus was cursed before it even had a name. A dynasty so drenched in blood that even the Furies grew weary. It began, as these things often do, with a golden lamb and two brothers at war. Atreus and Thyestes, sons of Pelops, should have shared the throne of Mycenae. But power, like wine, brings out the worst in men. When Thyestes seduced Atreus' wife and stole the golden fleece that proved divine favor, Atreus served him a banquet, one where the main course was Thyestes' own slaughtered sons. "Taste your legacy," Atreus whispered as his brother chewed. The sun hit its face, rivers ran backward, and the curse took root. Generations withered under its shadow. Agamemnon, sacrificing his daughter Iphigenia for fair winds to Troy, only to be murdered in his bath by vengeful Clytemnestra. Orestes, their son, tearing his mother's throat to avenge his father, then fleeing the Furies' serpent-haired wrath. Electra, keeping the family's madness burning like an undying hearth flame. Even the gods debated this one. Apollo defended Orestes. A son must avenge his father. The Furies shrieked. Matricide defies nature. Athena finally cast the deciding vote, establishing the first courtroom verdict in myth. But acquittal couldn't lift the curse. Blood called for blood in this house. What makes the Atridae different? Other myths punish individuals. This one infects. Like a poisoned heirloom, each generation clutched it tighter. Pelops' sin, cheating in a chariot race by loosening opponents' wheels. Thyestes' feast, where brother ate brother. Clytemnestra's axe, still crusted with Agamemnon's blood when she welcomed him home from Troy. The Greeks called it miasma, spiritual pollution clinging to a bloodline. Not guilt, but a stain even seawater couldn't cleanse. Yet within this carnage, we see the birth of justice. That trial on Athena's hill redefined vengeance as law. The curse didn't break, it evolved. Now picture Mycenae's ruins today. Wind whistles through empty lion gates where Agamemnon once walked. Scholars whisper that the curse was really bad luck, Bronze Age plagues, or political propaganda. But stand there at sunset, when shadows stretch like Fury's fingers across the stones, and tell me you don't feel it. That old, hungering dark, waiting for the next generation to trip. Zeus lovers rarely got happy endings, but his children? They got legends. And punishments, especially the ones who forgot their father's golden rule, never outshine the king of gods. Take Heracles, strongest of all mortals. His crime? Existing too gloriously. Hera's jealousy hounded him from the cradle, sending serpents to strangle him in his crib. Baby Heracles just laughed and throttled them instead. His famous 12 labors? Penance for a madness she inflicted, forcing him to slaughter his wife and children. Even after completing them, his end came via poisoned robe, a gift from a second wife tricked into believing it would ensure his fidelity. Then there's Dionysus, twice-born god of ecstasy. His mother Semele, consumed by Zeus' true divine form when she demanded proof of his godhood. Rescued as a fetus and sewn into Zeus' thigh, Dionysus spent his life straddling mortality and divinity, which made him dangerous. When King Pentheus denied his divinity, Dionysus didn't strike him down directly. He let Pentheus' own mother, in a Bacchic frenzy, tear her son apart with her bare hands. But the cruelest case? Apollo and Artemis twins. Leto, their mother, wandered pregnant and persecuted because Hera forbade any land under the sun to shelter her rival's bastard children. Delos, a floating island with nothing to lose, finally took her in, when Niobe later mocked Leto's small brood compared to her own 14 children. Artemis and Apollo turned their silver bows on the mortal offspring, slaughtering them all while Leto watched, stone-faced. Even Athena, born from Zeus' splitting headache after he swallowed her pregnant mother Metis, had to fight for respect. When the mortal Arachne dared equal her weaving skills, Athena's punishment was transformation, not death, but reduction to a spider. The message was clear. Zeus' seed carried greatness and peril. His children inherited his power, but also the consequences of his endless affairs. Some, like Persephone, became queens of other realms. Others, like Perseus, navigated divine politics to semi-happy endings. But most learned the hard way. To be a child of Zeus was to be both blessed and cursed. Hera's wrath was inevitable. Mortal jealousy was guaranteed. And their father? Too busy chasing the next lover to shield them.